De vuelta con el último tramo de
So
la...
we're back with our last stretch. It's the fourth day, and I would like to present you two great friends. Johanna Caterina Faliero. I'm going to read her really long title. She's a director of postgraduate studies on Tate governance, data compliance, Infosec, and cybersecurity at the Law School of the University of Buenos Aires. Johanna is with us today in Buenos Aires, and I've invited her. They don't know each other, but I help them to know each other because they're both great people. Nicolás Díaz, who you've already heard from in an earlier panel, who will be asking some questions at the end of Johanna's presentation. He's in Germany in the Duisburg Essen University. It's a bit late over there, but Nico's already more than willing to help out. So welcome back to two great friends. And Johanna is going to be talking about the Chimera of Artificial Intelligence and profiling in the crypto ecosystem. Johanna is an amazing person. She's like super active. If you follow her on the social networks, you'll just see how incredibly busy she is. All the things that she organizes, they're always fantastic. She invites me to join into her activities, which I'm grateful for. And Nico investigates all these issues. So I thought it was very interesting to invite him to moderate here because he'll probably have a better idea than I do about some of the issues which are going to come up today. So welcome to both of you. Sorry about the timing. We had we got a bit delayed with our 5 o'clock, 3 o'clock keynote. So, Olga, thank you very much. It's a pleasure, Nicolás. It's a pleasure, as you know, every year to be with you at the South School on Internet Governance and the Argentine School on Internet Governance, which you have every year. It's a challenge, and it's so interesting that you were able to hold this virtually despite the pandemic and to overcome all these problems that there have been because of social isolation. So I'm really grateful. And a big hello to all the students who are joining us from all over our region, who are with us virtually, and all those who are following us on YouTube. Johanna, would you like to share your presentation? We've already had a few problems with an earlier presentation, so just checking here. Great. Olga, I'll start with my speech then. So today, we're going to talk about the Chimera of Artificial Intelligence and profiling in the crypto ecosystem. They're both key topics. Number one on the list of our subjects that we're dealing with in our debates. And I just want to talk about the impact that they have on each other as disciplines, and also when you start to identify the effects that one might have in relation to the other, particularly regarding the natural impacts. AI, as we all know, is not exempt from impacts, and thus in the crypto ecosystem, which has its own features and very based or related to privacy, anonymity, security by design and by defect. So it's something that has an impact on artificial intelligence. So as an introduction, I would like to talk about cryptocurrencies. They've become they've inserted themselves into our digital economy along with other similar technologies, such as, for instance, Bitcoins. We've got blockchain technology, which has been implemented for other things, which are all fairly diverse when it comes to cryptocurrency management, and also involve intelligent contracts, as we know, smart contracts. Cryptocurrencies are here to stay in the digital economy as a way of exchanging value in our ecosystem. What adds value to digital economy is the way that this interacts with our social economy. And this has to do with the data economy. We huge exchange value in data. This creates smart contracts, which set us before regulatory challenges of various different kinds, which requires, as legal specialists, to come up with answers that are perhaps totally innovative from the legal point of view. Now, this study of the new factual and relational legal scenarios arising from these technologies make us realize that we have to seek some kind of sustainability, not only from the technical point of view, because the crypto ecosystem requires sustainability from a legal point of view, the impact that this has on the legal frameworks. Now, what can we recognize in terms of the crypto ecosystem? Its acceptance is growing and its value is increasing. Even if we only look at the speculative aspect of the crypto system, if we look at just that aspect, we know that it's increasing every day. Countries have progressively reacted concerning the acceptance of the crypto system and the development of regulatory systems. Central banks have ruled on the legality of these systems, and many of them have made progress proactively in regulating this area. Some of these are perhaps open to criticism because they're only doing it from the tax point of view. And perhaps from a legal point of view, that is where we should take responsibility, because these waves of legal adoption of new regulatory frameworks create within this a huge volatility within the crypto system. Now, if we, from a legal point of view, stop asphyxiating them from a regulatory point of view within the ecosystem, then that volatility will start to turn down, and it will create a new series of uses, which as new legislation and new regulation arises. And this will lead to the stabilization of the ecosystem. One ecosystem which is plagued with all kinds of different realities. In the first place, we have a dyad, the opposition or the dichotomy of the traceability of our operations versus the right to anonymity, which is one of the key points underlying the crypto system. Anonymity, embedded into design, thought of as one of the pillars for security and privacy offered by the system. The traceability also has an effect on cybercrime. Very often, and we have heard this, we can see this from all points of view. In fact, the point of view from the cybersecurity and information security regarding cryptocurrencies, we need to think of this because anonymity can be seen as antagonical to traceability for the authorship of these operations. So we have a right to privacy, which comes between us and the persecution of cybercrime. Then there is a dichotomy between the protection of personal data and the storage of this data. The issue of personal data has always been by design and default involved in the whole business of cryptocurrencies. But if we apply other data processing data, and if we look at where this ecosystem is going, then the tendency is to store larger and larger quantities of data. The crypto ecosystem should not allow us to lose sight of the fact that anonymity is integrated as a right within this. And what we tend to do is optimize this right, because we not only have cryptocurrencies which have privacy embedded in the design, but anonymity and also anonymous cryptocurrencies. And then you have crypto criminality, which calls for a change in forensic dogma. And then from the strictly legal point of view, we must start to try and take down the opposition to regulation, in opposition to the need for innovation, and try and deal with this as an obstruction to the development of the industry. Now, how does this dovetail with data management? This is about how we use new technologies to manage ecosystem, the crypto ecosystem. It's about transparency and data management, and how we empower the data holders to use the information as they wish within a dynamic information context. Then we'd have to look at safety and privacy of data by design and by default. Also, with these two aspects, we have to ensure anonymity. And what about artificial intelligence? AI is an innovative field, perhaps one of the newest fields to arise. And it's a very promising industry because it uses different types and techniques, which in general terms, in an analogy, what it tries to do is to emulate human thought processes. This ranges from machine learning, deep learning, and also for data processing, it uses big data and data mining techniques. The daily use of AI does not seem to come close to AI understood as being strong or general. In more substantial terms, it is based on predictive analysis by using algorithms and interpreting certain parameters. Quantitatively, this allows us to see the influence of AI on the markets, and this allows us to see the kind of underlying interests there are in bringing on board. It is a growing market. It is estimated that by 2025, it will have $127 million. This is what the market will be worth. And in terms of the impact of AI on the world economy by 2030, this impact could be in the region of $15.7 trillion. This gives us a clue. The interests behind AI are massive and very broad. Now, what is the chimera of artificial intelligence? What is this monster behind it? First, we have to know about what algorithms mean. We talk about them all the time, but we don't really understand that they've been with us for a long time. These algorithms which are running AI and which it uses are not always designed in the right way. Now, based on the belief that everything is in smart and smart is better, but in fact, not everything is smart. We are smart users and critical users, and we therefore must question whether the applications which are called smart are truly smart. On the other hand, there is a systematic confusion when it comes to the limits of AI, and this is confused with advanced automation. In fact, many of the apps which are used in generic terms in our society are not AI, not strong AI. They're all advanced automation techniques which can provide good results and provide interesting processing mechanisms. And they are certainly smarter than earlier ones. But that doesn't make them smart. And it doesn't mean that it's AI. And this also distorts the market. What we end up doing is falling into AI washing when we use AI as a mechanism, as a marketing mechanism. We say it's using AI in order to make things more attractive in marketing terms. One of the realities is what I said earlier. AI becomes AI out of control, which means that when we lose control of the algorithms are handled and we don't know how they end up working and what they've learned to do. Also, algorithms are not aseptic and impartial mechanisms. They are not free of interests. Through algorithms, we are victims, subjects, and objects of algorithmic profiling, creation of parameters which have an analytical purpose, and any biases that might be included. You can't take that away from AI. One of the consequences of this is the generalization of discrimination in the algorithms. In a society which, in addition to being data dependent, is algorithmic centric, because we value something that goes through an algorithm far more than it doesn't. And what this leads to is things like unquestionable truths being taken for that when they're not. And this is part of the hypervigilance and oversight system, which is also being applied in world level and at state level. We are currently in a society of systematic control, which takes advantage of algorithms for massive citizenship profiling. So the union of AI with profiling, what impact does this have from a legal point of view? From the first point, it optimizes profiling. It's a way of turning the profiling techniques into something far more accurate. And in order to justify the use of AI, people tend to resort to a fallacy, which leads us to believe that AI will lead to greater equality as a legal good in our society. AI, by allowing by applying the same rule, would apparently allow us to reach the same legal good. But in fact, what's happening is that AI is optimizing and improving the harm produced by profiling. So because this kind of quality doesn't come about naturally in a single way as a result of the right results, but the equality that we need to seek is simply the proper application of results, which might or might not be fair. And as we know, these algorithms do not have any way of being alien from interest. This leads us naturally to having these results repeating the same bias. AI serializes and standardizes the defects and legal impacts of which are inherent to profiling. And this means that we will end up systematically violate the exercise of self-determination in the world of IT by using data which belong to citizens and are individual. Also, this leads to something else which I believe is chronic in terms of the dangers meant to society. It's when you cross data, you cross databases, and this is something else, another problem for the vigilant society. This has an impact that we've never seen before, and it's far more invasive, it's far more intrusive, and it's more intimidating and dangerous than any other technique that we have ever used up till now. We must recognize this, and in order to qualify it from a legal point of view, this activity is inherently risky. So we have an imperious need to study the use of personal data and the consequences of using them in this field. If we don't carry out these impact studies in the right way to achieve the protection of personal data, AI will continue to take down people. We have another chimera within AI, which is the AI washing. In terms of marketing, everything which involves AI naturally attracts more funds than that which doesn't. because of what I said earlier. 15 to 50% more investments are made into those things which people say are smart compared with those that aren't. So there's this natural tendency at social and marketing level to think that whatever is smart uses AI. Now, what happens when we're faced with this? The AI washing, it doesn't use progress properly in terms of how you apply real strong AI. And then people tend to take less precautions when they're carrying out their studies, because what they're really doing is checking on the effects of automatic digital automation, not AI. But what happens once this practice has been installed? Perhaps there was less effect from the impact study, but the way in which this was used and these techniques were used, and the natural reductionism which takes us to accept them without thinking twice, it has more of a projectional aspect, because as soon as we admit this, it becomes very difficult to reject it in the future. So once we admit it, how do we revert the acceptance and implementation of the same if at some point we think that it doesn't have an impact? And this paints a pretty negative picture of the future, because with AI washing, we have less defenses and less firewalls as institutions and as public organizations. And if we enable these institutions, it will have far more of a damaging effect in the future. So what are the promises that AI makes us, and which has also installed itself in the crypto system? Greater adaptability, greater security, effectivity, efficiency, use of implementation in terms of privacy, data protection, and also greater sustainability within the system. That's when we start to look at what AI does with the different parts in our crypto ecosystem. The crypto ecosystem, like cryptocurrencies, use blockchain technology and data. Now, AI washing has undeniably reached the crypto ecosystem, but what we need to remember is that, as it says, AI washing means that for AI intelligence to be effective requires huge amounts of data to analyze. The bias cannot be reverted, and neither can those implementations used by AI in a crypto world. And AI isn't the only solution in technical terms for all crypto things. It can be used for some crypto things for which it is used to serialize certain activities which are useful for this kind of ecosystem, like, for instance, high-frequency commerce, automatized commerce through the use of APIs, and the use of fraud and bots, and a growing trend in cybercrime, which is crypto phishing. Also, AI and blockchain has also had another kind of impact, given the specific type of technology involved in blockchain. Blockchain technology also has an impact on the market, a significant one. By 2030, its estimated impact is going to be $3.1 billion. And in general terms, they've tried to integrate AI with blockchain technology. But that's where we should be asking ourselves, does AI have more to offer to blockchain technology, or does blockchain technology have more to offer AI? But now, when we apply AI to blockchain, we are increasing the potential of blockchain architecture. Whereas if we implement blockchain to AI, we are allowing the coherence of the system to grow, optimizing the natural incoherence inherent to AI, how this system of AI actually works. It's the opacity that we attribute to it, the lack of transparency of its algorithms. It's like it's a black box, the traceability of its processes, and how we document the algorithms. All of this is a problem. So I would like to revert the reciprocal influence and think of this as a way of saying that blockchain has an influence on AI through the smart processing and the efficient and smarter execution of the blockchain tasks within the smart use and decentralization and use of different algorithms to allow the better and optimized use of databases, which will allow personal data mechanisms to be improved through encryption using blockchain, which also involves the storage of security backup copies. It would also allow us to better use monetization and asset profitability mechanisms, and will allow us to improve or increase the trust in aspects such as traceability of operations on blockchain, transparency offered by blockchain to read operations, the integrity of registers, and audits, because there is the constancy as regards everything undertaken in the blockchain universe. What does AI offer as regards data within the crypto ecosystem? We can process the data regarding trading in a more intelligent way, in a smarter way. AI is used for this purpose as it optimizes the predictions regarding crypto asset pricing. This also allows there to be an improvement in investments, although it's not always the case. And these price predictions may or may not be right. And this coincides with what actually happens in practice. Now, what dangers are there in believing the determinism offered by AI? Well, it often encourages us to think that predictions are more than just indicators, and it hides the risk from us. They are merely to be used to orient us, but it's not a true and faithful picture of what is going to happen in the future in the ecosystem. Artificial intelligence also allows us to establish patterns and trends regarding the use of crypto data in order to find better reasonability underlying the predictions and better accuracy, because one of the problems attributed to the crypto system is the random nature and volatile nature inherent to the ecosystem, which is the speculative nature of cryptocurrencies, because this often puts us in a place where we can't see the trends in the markets. All of this helps to create better transparency and accountability in these contexts. So what are our final reflections, our final conclusions? In the crypto ecosystem, we know that it's totally innovative from a technical point of view, economic, legal, mathematical, and scientific. This innovation has also found a kind of balance or sustainability. The crypto system is sustainable. It allows certain economies of scale to be used, and also as regards costs. Now, its survival, and over time, when originally we thought that perhaps we were a little skeptical as to whether it would last over time or whether it was just going to collapse, or that maybe it would just end up strangling itself. That survival is based on the disruption inherent to the system. The crypto system has always challenged the banking and financial systems in our countries. And from a regulatory point of view, as soon as it comes up against the monopoly of monetary issue and the modalities used are finite, the inflationary aspect of certain cryptocurrencies within the logic of its principles, the issuance themselves, and all of these characteristics. Well, there's lots of other things that we can say in this aspect too. Then there's a whole issue of privacy and cybersecurity by design and by default. The support provided by open source technologies, which offer greater transparency and accountability, empower this ecosystem to ensure that it's stronger more robust within the digital economy. The ecosystem also allows us to create many spin-offs, decentralized, and the diversification of a market which started out being based purely on cryptocurrencies, but now encompasses smart contracts and operations within these, and a whole ton of different kinds of recorded applications which go far beyond the transactional. This reveals a very promising future, which I don't think there's going to be a ceiling. I think these technologies will continue to find new potential and continue to reinvent themselves. So what conclusions do we have here? The first one is that AI is progress. Nobody would deny that. I don't think anybody's going to say that at this stage. But the idea is that we need to make the most of it responsibly from a legal point of view, taking into account the fact that these benefits need to be made the most of, bearing in mind the consequences and impact in order to mitigate the negative aspects inherent to it. AI, and this is the problem here, which is currently plaguing the legal area, AI cannot only depend on ethical recommendations. We have distorted the system to such a point that we have reconverted or re-signified the legal mandates and turned them into ethical recommendations. So we've turned it obligatory into a sort of empowerment thing. And this means that we need to look at the reasons for the legal recommendations, which should be to uphold human rights. What does ethical really mean when you talk about handling artificial intelligence? We must regulate algorithms from a legal and technical point of view, because this is about respecting our rights and legal duties enshrined in our social order. We must also understand that innovation does not justify an obligatory application. This means that if we have undertaken the proper kind of impact study and the results of it in terms of personal data has shown us the result, which is actually negative, we should then apply that kind of technology. We shouldn't insert the kind of risks into our society which we cannot manage. This is quite simple. We cannot allow harm to flourish without repair. We cannot permit people to have to put up with damage that they cannot repair. Also, we want to avoid, because of this kind of determinism where we apply AI, we should try and avoid this reaching a sort of apotheosis, meaning that this ends up being some kind of final programmed death or death at a foregone conclusion, because you only reach this through techno-reductionism and a kind of freewheeling joy about this total ignorance of the consequences and impacts, which we must bear in mind before we get round to applying things like this. AI is not the solution. It's not a panacea to all our problems in our society, and neither is it a solution for the crypto ecosystem. AI has its uses, but we should not reduce its role to the use and exploitation of data for profiling. Privacy, security, the issue of anonymity, all of these are the pillars of the crypto ecosystem which we must not sacrifice. We should also provide for greater controls, speed, efficiency, and execution within the crypto ecosystem. And AI can be hugely beneficial in this sense, but it does not replace our own intelligence. Having said that, thank you very much for listening to me. And here are my contact data for Twitter Instagram, and my YouTube account. So ready to answer your questions. Once again, Olga, thank you very much and congratulations for the entire event. I've been following it. It's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'll be online tomorrow as well. Thank you, Johanna. I'd like to ask Nico, if who's here listening to us in Germany, and ask him if he has any questions. Do you have any comments? Because he's into these subjects. If he has anything to complement your excellent presentation.
Hello, Olga. Once again, thank you for having invited me. It's a pleasure, Johanna, to get to know you. You said things that are very, very true. On the one hand, we need to consider what we can apply AI to the procedure, because this has been applied in bioengineering, astrophysics, logistics, and it worked well. And it worked well because under those fields, the risk to physical integrity or human rights is highly mitigated. It's easy, it's negligible, basically. But when they are applied excessively in profiling, and we see this in social media, that is information that we share to sell advertising, and we don't know what else for, because it's like the Pandora box. I believe that the major issue is that it's used for manipulating decision making in their personal lives. Decisions that are made in their personal lives in different countries. I would like to know your opinion.
Nicolás, it's a pleasure. And I agree with what you're saying. There are applications in this field, like, for instance, diagnostics, biomedicine, pharmaceuticals. They have been implemented in a truly positive way and without the impacts that we are seeing in more social applications, such as those often given to this technique. So, yes, I fully agree with your point of view concerning the impacts that there have been across the board on our democracies, and that kind of algorithmic determinism, which ends up tying at the analysis of all the data which is being collected through either with or without our consent, because we can't even begin to talk legally about consent in the context of social networks, platforms, and apps and others. Today, we are using this whole idea of consent wrongly, because when we agree, they actually end up with far more data than we even know that they have about us. Then all of that data is stored, and the result of the profiling, which involve our goods, our things and rights as important as our democratic stability, these have to do with us giving up the data without being aware. All this data is kept, none of it is erased. All the way it's used by the algorithms is totally opaque, as are other processes implemented. It's like a black box. And I always say that these results are not only modulated by the algorithmic bias inherent to these formulas, but also by the sets of data being used to ensure that the results are recurrent and follow certain patterns, which obviously is very convenient at an industrial level. So all of this deformation or distortion and manipulation, and the manipulation of data, which is a real legal problem. It's not just an ethical problem. It is a crisis of confidence, which is based on the lack of legal compliance. This problem is systemic, and it's not only the intermediaries who are failing in this aspect, the applications and the platforms. It's not only these players that are falling through the net, it's also the states and the oversight bodies, because they're not doing the right things. They're not sanctioning these kinds of behavior. And the supremacy of these attitudes, which are very much, this Chicago school thing, the boys will continue to do what brings them the most money, and they will absolutely ignore any legal requirements because obviously it would be far more burdensome. In the same way, legal compliance would put them at a disadvantage with their competitors, because everybody is failing to comply systematically. So the system is extremely perverse because there is the complicity of all these actors, all these players, and it's multiplying within the ambit of compliance and digital human rights, because we have to start recognizing, we have to start talking about digital human rights. And in this sense, we have values that are compromised, not only our democratic values, but individual ones. And often the repercussion of the way that human rights are intermingled with collective rights, because privacy has an impact on society as a whole. Because when we're talking about lack of privacy, the lack of respect for privacy of citizens' data, this has an impact on the storage of data for the citizens who live in a specific state, and they trust the administration, and they trust the state to look after their data and their rights. So we have to bear this in mind, and we have to remember that the solution isn't simply to put all the pressure, all the burden on the shoulders of the data holders, because otherwise there won't be a change. We must continue to put pressure. Continuing to put pressure on the weakest link does not mean that compliance with this legal mandate will achieve what we want, because it's not going to be enough. We need the authorities to step up to the plate and act in a preventive way, and we shouldn't have to wait until individual complaints are made or claims and harm is seen. Otherwise, the situation is not going to change, because otherwise it just ends up being an individual thing with compensation, but we'll never know, just how much this is being replicated.
Totally agree with you. You said something very interesting. You mentioned consent versus to accede. In the personal data protection law, they developed the technological edition, the version, because it's a law that is very risk-oriented. And nowadays, I'm involved in a project at the European Union where we try to help those that develop software to have a data protection risk assessment. So how do you think this will affect the policies in social media? Because when you sign your policy or sign the policy, there's a risk in here. Nobody tells me what may go wrong. What do you think you could do in these cases?
I've really been studying this issue, and I think it's one of the things I find most interesting about the information process per se, because as you say, for consumers, for data holders, they're not provided with clear information whether they can actually see the risks. These are ambits where naturally, as you well know, these have been designed to provide us with a full sense of security. Each time these are more organic, these are more intuitive, and they appear so innocuous on the surface. And this gives us a false sense of security about these virtual environments. So we don't see the risk in the same way as we should, because it's not lucid, it's not clear, it's not tangible. Furthermore, the fact that we embrace this risk means that we ought to have a rational ability to abstract ourselves from the situation, which also depends on our culture and our education, the kind of contact we have with these information systems. I know that they're not so new, they've been with us for years, but actually they're still with us. The digital gap is by no means closed. There's another kind of digital gap now, which concerns how it's the quality and user information the user gives to things. We're not all experts. We don't all have enough knowledge about privacy configurations, and we use these networks, but we probably don't really know how to configure our privacy settings properly. Do we know how to set our networks? Do we know how we appear on these different apps and interfaces? So we have a crisis which has to be resolved in that aspect, and that informational link. Also, the fact that the risks are not transparent, the opacity of the system tends to hide these risks. Nobody can see them, and therefore nobody can reject them, because that the whole game of consent is based on the fact that if I am aware of the risk, if I have the power, I can use my position and I can continue to control my data and express my denial, the fact that I don't want to continue with this kind of treatment of my data. So in this sense, we must optimize information processes, because one of the requirements, if we want to talk about consent, I talk about informed consent because that's what contracts are all about, isn't it? Today we talk about informed consent. Then we need to improve these informed consent processes using a clear language and following this idea of providing the best quality information possible as briefly as possible, to make it as easily understood as possible so it doesn't confuse people, and allow them to fully understand what is going on. And it doesn't just become a ritualistic exchange of data where someone actually just abdicates responsibility because of what they can't or can't see. And this leads us to the RGP, the GDPR, because it has had a major impact on risk and the unequivocal expression of consent as the way of reverting the bad practices which have plagued the market. We have had a sort of attempt with the reform of the Data Protection Act, with a bill which got out of date, and they tried to introduce tacit consent as one of the forms of expression of consent, but and this would probably have led to greater abuse, with something quite opposite to the GDPR. So we need to once again emphasize the need to move away from the formal processes and look at ways in which we can get information to be properly understood. It needs to involve, we need to allow people to control what they say, because if the risks are transparent and explicit, users cannot exercise their self-determination to decide what is done with the information. One of the points is also the need to update the characteristics of information. In Argentina, we are proud to say that consumers need correct and precise information, but when it comes to personal data, that list of requirements, which, as I say, is not comprehensive in terms of what is done with our information, that not comprehensive list, which is the responsibility of the lawmakers, it doesn't say what kind of processing techniques should be informed to the users and what are the risks involved, which would be the right thing to do. And also in terms of consumer logic, we've talked about the right kind of information, and this takes us to a paradoxical question. What kind of right information does who consider to be? Who is going to condition the information according to whose interests? So we need to change the logic in which we approach the issue of how information is requested and how it's presented. It has to be conditioned in order to protect everybody's best interests.
I totally share your opinion. We need more transparency, we need more information. And we need these details. Oh, we should have these details visible, because if not, we're not sure of the service or the product that we're buying. It's like the cigarette package, if it says that is harmful for your health, and it says, but consumers know that it's harmful, but it's not like that. This is exactly the same thing. But users know what risks are? No. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of research that says that consumers do not know what the risks are. So it's not that ethical having that. You spoke of blockchain. Blockchain is trending, and they're developed further. It's a growing ecosystem here, and in Europe there's a lot of interest. However, we've seen interest also in the things that we can do in terms of architecture for privacy, security. Smart vehicles, smart cars. But blockchain has another problem, because what is in blockchain, it cannot be erased and it cannot be deleted. Are you thinking something from the legal point of view to solve this? What can you tell us about this?
The application that we would do in technologies which are irreversible as part of the solidity of their own ecosystem, I think the right thing to do is to take the right preventive measures, the logical ones, right? Which should be not to use it for those registers where their main feature is the potential mutability of the same. And this involves taking certain a priori decisions, blockchain as a database of, is it in the same way that AI, can it be used for some things or for others? It's not appropriate for all uses of information, particularly that which is ephemeral or which gets out of date, because you can't promote technical measures which are going to pervert the system with a view to supporting certain kinds of decisions. If we use this technology, we must be very clear that we are using recordable type information which belongs in the domain of recorded information and which requires timestamps, and that that over time the information isn't changed. But it wouldn't be right to use blockchain, although it might seem possible. And we should be using other kinds of databases for certain records which are mutable and do not belong to static situations, but evolutive or dynamic situations with deadlines. So, as happens with cryptocurrencies, if we want cryptocurrencies which have infinite issuance, then that would pervert the logic and we would be moving away from inflation And we would be looking at imprinting it with other characteristics of other things in society, which would mean that we wouldn't be able to use it in the same way. This has to do with selectivity. Not everything works all round. And neither should we fall into a sort of reductionism which looks at whatever is new has to apply to everything, because not always the newest stuff is the most adequate. In our life, this applies in our life and in our society, where we'll be using technologies where sometimes we have to use more classical stuff, and in other areas we can continue to advance. This is because it could be possible to rewrite blockchain at a programming level as many times you want and start to exercise certain rights within it. It wouldn't be very smart to try and establish evolutive and dynamic register which respond to status, which can be auto-defined and change on a permanent basis. And we shouldn't apply that to other areas where this can be changed. Our constitutions and charters, we don't use this to refer to technologies because we know that on the one hand, we're talking about things that are graven in stone, and on the other, we are using them in the context of resolutions and legislative measures, which are far more malleable. So we need to make the most of the opportunities offered and apply them in the right context without forcing through the adoption of technologies which are actually not the most appropriate.
Thank you very much. Are there any further comments? Very interesting. Super smart. Both of them are great researchers, great Argentine talent. I love you guys. Nico is in Germany and Johanna here in Buenos Aires. Unfortunately, we're finished in the day. Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the students? Well, we can send them by email. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. I know that Johanna prepared her presentation. It was precisely what I wanted. That both of them could discuss this since they know this deeply and they did their own research. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Nicolás, it's going to be cold right now in Germany. Stay healthy, stay safe. Greetings from Oscar and Adrian. Thank you very much. Nico have a schnitzel. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we're going to break for a minute, and then we are going to address the last presentation of today.